Okay, guys.
Yeah, I know. Obviously.
I think I did send it already. No, I'm mistaken. Greenhill CL.
No. You said you sent it.
Yeah.
Me too.
Advantage one is marijuana. The lawful use standard for federal trademarks. Mandates compliance with federal laws and registration requirement blocking cannabis trademarks due to their illegality. Till 21 federal protection is not available. Cannabis trademarks, so the PCO law finds is still permitted for trademarks with cannabis deemed illegal by the federal government. Cannabis related goods and services are barred from trademark registration and cannabis registration mark must be used in commerce that commerce must be lawful in individual states. Legal with cannabis is not enough since statute is illegal under federal law. The ban is not a statute. Administrative nature even if Congress never discussed marijuana. The PCO so acknowledged the state activity is in commerce. In 2018, the form in the bill of trademark registration will now allow because include hemp and marijuana. PCO issued by clarifying commerce are no longer banned. U.S. leads the world in innovation, but adulteration and a lack of cross-border exchange of samples, exports. Harley 20 grows in the U.S. the best quality product in the world. Crop will be in high demand and grows able to ship to other countries, states, and the U.S. the first drive innovation weight for the export currently it takes more seeds to grow good weed sophistication under the U.S. industry. Takes better quality innovation in the world. One sector in the world. Now turn the industry into what it is for foreign customers. Value for the oversight ensures product is safe and unadulterated. Shareholders are key to commercialization and product reliability to the defense of commerce. 22 joint recent years city trust against cannabis trademark application for products ineligible protection week such goods are not used lawfully. Gaining protection is crucial for an industry trademark global accuracy sponsors for businesses to protect the goodwill and use others to use similar marks companies support the branding first positioning ahead because good branding will trust good legitimacy across of eligibility whether companies sell goods and comply with CSA and FTC and TW eligible for products and CBD remaining eligible under the FTC therefore sell profitable CBD excluded. For trademarks we can do some business competitive marketplace trademarks to allow businesses to utilize the internet and for brand percentage influenced by trademarks higher traffic trademarks and more customers recognition the future additional 3,000 active trademark applications for cannabis and under mature trademark under 7 average filing international applications single platform claims priority over countries of members and rates valued higher with trademark and secured branding certified for sales trademarks lead to expansion of one industry to another increasing the brand and the niche of different areas and entering the market early production by base critical cannabis globally become a growth manufacturers have access to federal trademarks and brands spend fewer research litigation state trademarks not provide a cause against another company branded protection will have higher levels of investment against traditional industries due to the number of listed activities of cannabis trademarks also on the right establishing limits use that is not eligible for eligible restrictions legitimate parties with the aim of protecting profits ultra needs. This is not a popular brand established use by fixing a logo to t-shirt and register. Cannabis innovation also solves the markets in 24 that research to supply the potential of cannabis offers revolution AVR cannabis except insulin growing effects bacteria resistant antibiotics immunomodulators for property distributed CBD cell activation THC function proliferation and production. AMR creates engineered pathogens like C.J. Johnson 22 C supports supposed to take to the next century drug resistant constitute GCPR no exploration taken into account resistance at the positive part of engineered pathogens discuss the direction of biomodels in the middle at part of future pathogens causes environmental overshoot exchange of Bucaro. The 21 with standard bacteria and moral members of microbiota influencing disease disorders immunity release mobile genetic elements to disturb the critical aspects of the earth oxygen nitrogen sulfur direction it takes mitochondria biochemical cycles of the molecular for human health massive antibiotic use for long-term risks of the health of the earth. It allows us to survive nuclear war. Green 18 cannabis ability to remove radioactive waste as new combats the effects on humans survive nuclear war and which are marijuana leach up the pulse and affects how chemicals and particles metals fire radiation hemp is one of the best favorable trademark protection polices out the black market Greenberg in the 20s now protection trademarks only encourages not goods and services granting trademark registration allows legitimate markers to police out the black market safe trademarks are not sufficient across the establishment interstate brands overseas federal trademark allow the police and illegal businesses we shall allow companies to police the market and protect our trademarks this allows courts to step in for consumers and unscrupulous zeros even without legalization, preventing trade registration will. The cannabis black market fuels Chinese organized crime. Tell 24. Chinese crime dominated illicit marijuana factual legislation developed differences versus the black market. Oklahoma black market valued at $44 billion a year. More than 80% of China cannabis are billing rise of Chinese crime. Global powerhouse security officials say Chinese crime pre Asian conflict club at 24 Asian government green power share Chinese crime striver conflict globally corrupt sweet companies and power by armed actors feeling the comic Chinese police car launch crackdowns fraud gambling laundering trafficking scam and China campaign against crime that goes nuclear Saha 23 talking gay South States company theater great power competition with the US and China loses South America China's China's working towards concluding COC claim South China sees the most police certification in China the US China reports how thousands of regained its police response China's competition is the only anticipating this heard the Lebanon military station the reason US security base close proximity to Taiwan and SCS development slowing of the COC only feasible way to resolve common developments and secretly SCS in the near future independently organized crime in Southeast Asia causes global war. Unit 21 the illicit economy is tremendous security net cost of livelihood kleptocrats and organized criminal works net terrorist groups undermine democracy rule of law imperial sustainability inflicts confidence in economy so threat multiplies Asia cognizant of political leaders undermine security chamber production drives out the Sinaloa cartel by ignoring US Mexico bilateral efforts Note 17 crypto net several markets less visible to establish trafficking new crime organization less increase in greater production of cannabis frameworks allow reduce crime organization central to corruption cartel change more size profitability continues providing framework for production for the cannabis and government establish more effective bilateral efforts to reduce crime along this Sinaloa all the rights they align they undermine US global commitments for global arms races how 10 the isolating Mexico cartel American revenue border cartel strengthening the insurgency fighting America's role in the border border cause many progress in the military elsewhere allies adversaries justify just with the disruptive arms racing that illicit weed smuggling causes nuclear attacks Blake 17 a nuke could be short on US and marijuana experts experts explain the preferred method for delivering nuclear device to the bill of marijuana to issue of radiation or low time record delivery shipment to sales detection Harvard say it would be easy the plan first competition and unlocks cross-border changes 20 year 24 federal projection German production allowed to incentivize brand legal remedies access to funding allowed to differentiate products and brands and profits faster competition with the reputation rates are higher human registration security stream regulation allowed counterfeit cannabis granting cannabis German production with easy expansion of other states and enable growers different brands and safe for production cannabis without the export of government implementing centralized system for federal shipments ease access to other states and other companies reach more net greater expand business therefore the United States federal government should strengthen the production of massive trademarks by limiting registration refusals made on the basis that trademark unlawfully violates federal statutes Advantage is over PTO enforcement of lawful use undermines efforts of other ACC enforcement regimes and effectively creates a de facto private cause of action for laws unrelated to trademarks. Because that's 22 lawful use undermine administration of other federal laws. PTO sanctions non-trademark laws and agencies and more expertise to the discretion of other statutes. PTO failed to give deference to PTO system on imposing sanctions on others of not by ignoring the choices of other PTO troops carefully orchestrated enforcement chiefs. Teachers on enforcement registration of marijuana. PTO undermine the premise of PTO policy de facto private cause of action of statutes not provide any private enforcement. PTO effectively given private parties enforcement of federal statutes. That de facto cause of action creates a backdoor for enforcement of other statutes adversely affecting the FTC. Rape 17 application of the law use creates a backdoor for other statutes. No private cause of action. The FTC creates no private cause of action for goods that are misbranded not lawful use on the basis of trademark numerous cases accepted on lawful use. As FTC, without mentioning any problem, it's not clear that guarantees drug shortages. Kumar, 24 drug shortages becoming more common. The U.S. experience war shortages connected possible scramble life saving charging increasingly rely on combating shortages and complicated manufacturers subsidy ingredient supply problems challenging to the problem of trusting increase in production cancer likely to shortage specialty pharmacies increasing counter effects and compounding global supply chain shortage insecurity glad feeling well if focus to the shortage of the monetary industry contributed by abuse and obesity the mental health illnesses rapid march to combating pharmacies with litigation issue lawsuits against pharmacy trademark violations false advertising and unfair competition none make claims for crime infringement dismiss the attempt to make private cause of action with adverse decision absence of accessibility patient access to medicine collapses disease response scores 24 COVID is reliance on fragile supply chain essential farm chronic shortages so to say access to health threat for entire health care system global supply chain are not near the ground represent glowing public health threat oncology medication antibiotics pain medications that affect patient people unnecessarily die without medicated medicines health system more pronounced but systems are already trained by common co-real need for resilient supply chain drug shortage or generic medicines pandemics cause extinction bomb it's 23 international lives matches humans research gems larger now than needs to be more what's got global travel urban density a great opportunity to pass in early pathogen may only kill a small portion of the population deep historical evidence system with high probability of human extinction from pandemics and civilization collapse full erosion the food security result in insufficient cognitive fitness and causes geoengineering and temperature rapidly rise resulting in double catastrophe combat the harms of the initial catastrophe contagious cancer causes extinction John 20 transmissible represented an equal evolutionary phenomenon several cancers have all the numerous cases encouraged distribution extinction and cancers evolve continuously to opponents innovations generated in our equal evolution or arms race that may be recapitulated on the digital percussion of metastatic cascade the plain cells both sneers Nico 22 the lawful use no place to triple well even Dako never the limiting not reduce cost and limitation feature previously granted and the complicated doctrine and truth arbitrary is already possible to work in the requirement without abolishing if you could voluntarily abolish the requirement in shape proceedings to repeal 2.6 times GDAP should expressly hold compliance with no requirement agency making clear that in no longer refuse for shaping no longer violated some statute of the able to alleviate the harms that some of the requirements to allow to register a market applicant and other laws concerned to bring the matter to agency enforcement law if not abolish lawful use of courts should invalidate the requirement at the next opportunity. I'm good. I'll send the phone.
Good.
Yep.
What does it mean to eliminate the registration refusals?
It means that when trademarks are denied on the basis that they violate some statute, the plan would reduce that.
What statute?
Any statute. That's like the law firm requirement.
So what does that like protect? I didn't read.
Yeah. So I mean, is there anything else you want to say?
It protects trademarks that violate different statutes, other things that.
Like any statute.
Huh?
Any
Not-
statute. So now.
Not
Yeah, I
necessarily.
mean, normal means is like
once-
violating statutes is law firm requirement. Yes.
Ones that the PTOs.
Is normal means lawful use requirement.
What? What do you
Yes.
say?
I mean,
Normal
that's-
means is reducing registration refusals on the basis of law firm requirement. Yes.
Okay, that's normal means. Okay. It's not for like pick purposes, but like what does that cover other than
Yeah, so the PTO is currently finding that trademarks in a variety of fields are not eligible for protection because they violate different statutes. The problem is that the PTO is determining which statutes make a trademark not eligible, and it decides the illegality of certain products. So like things like with the FAA, within certain like plane parts, if it's not approved by the FAA, then you can't get a trademark on that.
Okay.
Similar to the FDCA and the CSA.
So like plane parts, weed.
Like I have a laundry list card. You
Okay.
can get them.
It's like
I
yeah,
mean,
like
it's-
any like
it's fine.
illegal
Okay.
product,
It's like a lot-
drugs,
a
like
lot of
psychedelics.
Why is private enforcement bad?
Because it causes people to sue because they have an incentive basically to proliferate lawsuits off of any federal statute. So they find like there's like thousands of places and statutes that an invention could feasibly violate. So they rush to find like basically the most obscure law that the PTO wouldn't necessarily enforce themselves, but private actors have an incentive to police other people out of the market to reduce their competition.
And the problem with the PTO's form of private action is that it's not what those statutes were intended to do, and the PTO itself is determining the legality of those statutes and not the agencies. In the example Amicus evidence, the part we highlighted, it gives the example of the DOJ, which has a non-enforcement policy, but the PTO is doing a de facto enforcement of that policy, which means it's intruding on the DOJ's enforcement goals and intruding on its goals for marijuana.
Wait, what is the DOJ enforcing?
It's not enforcing marijuana. It says like the Miko's card says that the
DOJ
DOJ has taken a non-enforcement policy and is deemed that's left to the states, but the PTO is sort of going
Okay,
rogue
so
and
the
enforcing
states are
it anyway.
doing protection.
No. So the states are like somewhat enforcing marijuana. Obviously, there's some states that have legalized it, some states have not. But the point is that the DOJ broadly has a non-enforcement policy. PTO is not, and disobeying that.
And that's demonstrative of the PTO's rogueness in determining these legalities and illegalities of the statutes, because they don't have the expertise, which means that any type of private enforcement good, private action good, offense doesn't make sense because it's not reliable.
Strengthening intellectual property feeds into capitalism. Working 20 feet market extract value it's not even the level of commodities and abstract form of commerce patent coverage. And trademarks comply with the absent capitalist forms of production capitalist creative forms and forms of poverty limits. The economy in response to degradation of the IP regime as the outcome capitalist teacher of the economy and outcome of the neoliberalism characterized by property necessity to convert instrument accumulation which ensure expansion competitiveness IP pay the way for the globe IP experience. Plunder of the commons with the never ending task of sum to achieve capital accumulation. Capitalism causes extinction, climate change, endless militarism, pandemics, new humanity, labor, and molded 23 the idea global extinction linking capital, climate change, pandemic, climate driven militarism, movies over the need for systemic transformation, things necessary to lower emissions, conflict with capitalism, extremes are threatening to minority into democratic socialism. Just as communities turn to capital soil, the future leaves us dependent on fertilizing capitalism, ability to fear, exploiting wealth, climate change, development, biodiversity, nuclear, biological, chemical, cyber war, capitalism related costs of all these are the ultimate planned economy solves the case. Roscoe 25, expanding and scaling technology ideas into new products, scaling production for use, other supplies, and control, free public knowledge, generate innovation, experimentation, no longer sad. Companies may all pay wealth and protect more collaborative will over capital made on financial institution banks. VC need to generate huge example mechanisms based on popular demand, separate level of biological production applied in different sectors that develop complementary innovation that's within their ex ante, which products have a higher impact but in cost effectively. State-owned agencies of funding and oversight solution-based citizen council boards and participatory reforming democratic mission, design mission, pursuit of carrying out missions and reduce complexity of information supply the process improves the weather planning, providing democratic friction incentive structure and planning is flexible advantage, reducing uncertainty, allowing decision making from non-financial reasons. That's all the key penalties. Assholes increase penalties for violations of IP strengthen means increasing capital at all, or strengthening finance increases protection means enforcement of exclusive economic rights, doggy, fortune, protection, intellectual property, enforcing preference, recreation, different others from PC that requires damages or injunction, but 1021 seeking enforcement, damages or injunction, violation, they may don't mean negative for limits lengthening, and modifying and granting IP protections or untenable areas, on top of small modifications, IP administration, eligibility, holdings, or negative, on a massive topic with unlimited mechanism. Last off is a CSR template. This the United States federal government should create a voluntary corporate social responsibility requirement to implement protection for trademark laws. Trademarks that unlawfully violates federal statutes and counterline solve this spills over. RSQ 24 IP can read ethical thinkers opportunity to seek out information and PhD will just encourage recent season behavior pyramid and reasonable approach to CR30 the IPR identifies skills and not people or clearly often diverse demand and conflict obligation to give it to smaller one application to consumer society competition lower pricing and consumer welcome legalistic IP price accompanying measures to set up important strategy innovation ethical issues challenge not tomatoes and company and severe playing CSR based and related matters UP outcomes of IP has intangible non-related difficult to assess negative impact often defeats and indirect sources all large cover impact IP greater potential to use if I'm words to not have clear markers of real intangible property asset to use strategic gaming problems to use ambiguity gently to have infinite and the questions of various existential factors or also 20 companies should be able to disable never been more relevant environmental economic pandemics technology food shortages wealth disparity supply chain disruption inflation as third potential markets of innovation imperative to access firms have pervasive measures of society. Next off is the tax tablet. The United States federal government should expand the scope of its tax laws over infringement on projects that unlawfully violate federal statutes under trademark law, specifically by applying corrective taxation as a cost for non-compliance and dedicate significant enforcement funding to the Internal Revenue Service, substituting taxes for an identical effect but solved better by avoiding legal blowback. Reasons 17 regulatory taxes are suitable while making decision economic arguments available regulation economic condition rather than classified behavior as illegal. Allowed to regulate decision making regulation by tax law. Liberators enter the lower force regulation increase the risk of legal conflicts achieving the same effect as implemented fair. However, the price of error will be lower than prohibition. Using taxes as a new independent regulator to mainstream them as an instrument to broadly cushion sign responses to inevitable ecological, democratic, and political crisis. Extinction, democracy, climate, and pollution, resource depletion, biodiversity, the status of worldwide threats, common responsible not provide solutions to these year, but existing instrument new approaches, process, or intentional taxation are not understand political or democratic revolution, concentration, expanding issues, can install new balance holding effectively to replacement, ending a new liquid that can be more sustainable, represent on the origin, and experience such as the alternative one how to change together the creations and about policies is free. Practice payroll taxation will further examine as the main subject. There is no consensus on regulatory taxes policy or rule, but rather one part of comprehensive mix that covers the advantage kind of body. The United States federal government should not apply the lawful use requirement to cannabis trademark legalize cannabis and cannabis derived product sales individual they read that card in the one seat, the weed advantage. Read the hack from the quote Rooster magazine citing a single scientist can't solve global nuclear radiation. It's about radiation treatments not enduring global nuclear catastrophe. Just assume that we die from nuclear war. Now other fund source security. Crime versus Brown 24 footprint has expanded around the world by no crisis. First in the U.S. scope of organized crime for China accepts farming out trafficking, water groups engaged in poaching, kind of elaborate fraud people trafficking illegally. People in the U.S. Chinese fiction specialty argument. Chinese espionage. Organized crime in China has a limited impact. Global organized crime index 23 troops tend to be small under control. The limited level of violence is starting low crime and 19 crimes linked to resulting dissolution of groups. No evidence to show violence. Chinese government takes an eradicating has no evidence to show Chinese government or is engaged in criminal markets. No new terror. McDonald's will use the ability to achieve nuclear capabilities to love the acquisition of rename alien will not be beneficial. Likely they only have enough from one attack that makes texting impossible with the high risk of failure to make functioning weapon without being caught obtaining weapons. People to quotative well financed organized actor not connect the ability to take without detection ID. Would promote responses by the international community is a strong deterrent provide nuclear capability. Smuggling is complete fiction. Blake 17 nuclear bomb could be shown that the US candidate in marijuana experts. Oh, quote, my preferred method for delivering nuclear devices in available in Mexico. While that is thumped, terrorists Trump's entire ethos and massive crackdowns on the border make the relationship unrecoverable. There are evidences from 2010 and massive chaos on the order in the last 15 years have triggered the impact. Now, kleptocrats, no words has extinction, no impact. W17 myth. Kleptocracies are strong today. Most powerful countries are kleptocracies. Russia seems to be dictating global affairs. China is the second largest economy, but this group priorities and looting of means of the country are weaker than they should be corrupted. Many governments are greater than the longer competition and weakened governments that destroy it and no illicit economies impact. Petro's empty devastates the ability to find intervention at modest levels that take weakness laws. These are less than traffic penalties to access to found research lacking in war trophies and so on. Helping to Mexico and South Africa emerging comments of economic activity over its percentage. The return on link is disgustingly miscut and argues against private action are bad because it uses the quote because it's used the enforced trademark which stifles competition. Zero warrant for how unlawful use can enable trademark protection. Kumar 24. Their record and here threat of litigation rights imposing trillion effect on IP litigation. Trademarks protect the brand rights of both brand and established name manufacturer competition suing false advertising under land habit lawsuits against company firms alleging trademark violation claims of infringement. The sperm suit using lawsuit organized competition authority and only private enforcement can supplement a failing FDA is key to pharma innovation regulation. Clover 12. Private or scrutiny regulations because of the public bodies under reason of the rule not accepted FDA. But the bullshit compliance by FTC number of drugs and regulations research and regulate all public enforcement suffer informational decision and company capture by interest private enforcement provides direct about official limited tobacco to limited research and limited external regulation. Malfunction to resist more insulated for capture consumer safety prevents clear sustainable consumer protection. Agency provided holder couch and extinction only put gaps in the FT regulations of emerging biotech. Honeywell 24 biotechnology protection no research hesitation development but keeps the probability of damage to civilization emerging biotech have been more disruptive impacts to combination become hot just for legal norms. Rules that have including unauthorized application, hidden capital, harbor strong dispatch by system and limitation of technology, abuse and illegal acquisition, increasing regulatory systems, and delegate in development of in the U.S. no judicial litigation or regulatory oversight as an FDA. Overseeing pharmaceutical goods, biological use in the U.S. biotechnology security and bottom regulatory framework for certain government body oversight of the FD company. HHS layoffs, deficit oversight and enforcement. 4-1 HHS layoffs impact 10,000 employees over 27 change report on admin leave FDA. Finish entire human FCA determining no disease impact or switch with the number of pandemics failed because even local collapse and medieval to not find all the history is complete with examples of resilience. The combination of pandemics, other catastrophic ancestors concerned but the little medical knowledge we should common in our own ability. The closest thing extinction we commit on disease and ask a lot of argument hesitant to place talk on the dehumanity driven and no impact we see. Only evidence they have read is hypothetical. It's also about animals. What is he? Johnson 16 imagine cancer cell have the ability to pass on their body so far. This only have the most unusual circumstances. On each of the occasions, the most but no for the only no cancer that is continue to move from body to body have been found in other animals. The lifespan of even the most body cell embryo is too brief for cancer to move easily between the ability to leave to another body. Treatment solves cancer. Fergus 17, 97 is supposed to enter embryo gene into congenital disease. CRISPR is highly versatile center using technology to develop treatment for cancer. FDCA key to principal area of non-enforcement for drug regulations. Bromar 24. The Hegler petition the FDA enforcement to friendly use of specific drugs alleging their violation of FDCA. FDA refutes the agency decision on agreement enforcement until later from the FDA determination was proven legitimate.
Are you good? Status. Okay, let's start on this case string. So your Kumar re-highlight that you said is disgustingly miscut. I just want to read you a few lines from this. It says, the part that you've highlighted. Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly have filed lawsuits against compounding pharmacies alleging trademark violations, claims of trademark infringement, pharma using lawsuits to weaponize the FDA's authority. Is that good or bad?
Our argument is a private actions.
So those things
No,
that you
first
said...
of all, you were talking about the FDCA, which we think has...
No. These are private pharmaceutical
you're talking
companies.
about the FDCA.
So, okay, the things I just read...
And also there's no impact.
Hold on, Gal. Those things that I just read, those are private pharmaceutical companies, right?
I disagree.
You disagree that Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are private pharmaceutical companies? Look it up.
Okay, repeat the point.
Okay, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk have filed multiple lawsuits against several compounding pharmacies alleging trademark violations, strong claims of trademark infringement.
Yeah.
Certain
okay,
pharmaceutical companies are using lawsuits.
One
to
is that
weaponize
there were
FDA's
claims of trademark infringement, which means that it's totally justified. And second, you haven't read it.
Well, yeah, no, I know,
You
but
haven't
you're
read
saying
the
that,
impact to these
okay,
companies to
why
die
is
from
that,
these
but
businesses in the
but
first
you
place.
said that that's good for competition?
Not good for competition, but good for...
Okay, so large companies suing
like, no
smaller
one's read an
companies,
impact of
blocking them.
competition in this debate.
You have. Okay, let's read the card that you said is your impact. FDCA, internally, quote, I mean,
we just think that private enforcement...
quote, competition
is
become
stop
white
the
hot,
circulation
disregard
of
for
bad
legal
drugs.
norms, rules are overstepped. Your impact is
All
also
we think
about
is that
competition.
private action is key to stop circulation
Yeah,
of
and
bad drugs.
and the line that you've re-highlighted in Kumar is competition good, right?
We have no impact to competition.
I mean, I just read you the line from your impact card that says competition. But more importantly is that, like, to be clear, this card is saying that, yeah, this card says that, okay, so just to be clear, your turn is just like, YAF promotes, you know, it's like stops private action, right? Well,
Yeah.
private action is bad, or private action is good one.
Because it's key to stop the circulation of bad drugs. They have more resources. They have more active incentives, and they're not bogged down.
Right,
like,
but the re-highlight that you read just read more like it blocks out.
No. Again, like you haven't read. Okay, that's totally not true. You haven't read a part of that card that says that that case of trademark infringement was not justified, which means that case of stifling those businesses was justified in that case. Like if someone actually infringed on your product,
manufacturers quote curb
private
competition,
enforce.
suing for false advertising under them.
Yeah, like again, you've not read lines that say that was bad.
Your read says that curbs competition, and we've read an internal link to innovation about competition.
If it's bad, then yeah, they can file.
Yeah,
for
okay,
infringement.
you've
That's
read
what
an
private
internal
action
link
is all
for
about.
us, as far as I understand.
No.
Okay, let's go to the taxes counterclaim. Does it apply taxes as enforcement for trademarks?
It applies taxes for infringement on those trademarks.
Trademarks? Correct. There you go, just sitting the clock. Yeah.
Orders going to be the marijuana advantage, the overreach advantage, T penalties, CAPTE, the advantage counterclaim, CSR counterclaim, treaties counterclaim. Marijuana advantage, overreach advantage, T penalties, CAPTE, advantage counterclaim, CSR counterclaim, tax. Got it? Green, yellow.
Cannabis inhibition sold drinking water substance followed to prevent radiation. That's our green evidence. Green is from Rooster, but cites empirics and says that it was able to be used in Chernobyl, that its tech exists now, but it's not being commercialized, which means the app is key. Other funding sources may exist, but they do not persist. Brown is wrong and is indicted by Money C, the Clap and Tan, which say that Chinese officials are cracking down on all other sources of income other than drugs, which occur in the United States, which they jurisdictionally cannot do. The O crime card is about petty thefts in China. Our Rotella evidence says that the O crime, that marijuana has propelled China's O crime to a major global powerhouse, which allows them to erode and cause Southeast Asian conflict, which undermines weak states to ignite regional conflicts. That's our Clap evidence. Luna says that even without drawing countergrounds, get a hold of nukes and escalate. No new terror is wrong. People smuggling into the country, which our Blake evidence says, and it's supported by a Harvard professor, and says that causes nuclear extinction because it causes a retaliation because the U.S. blames it on anybody. The Blake evidence is not complete fiction. It's citing a Harvard professor. Mexico bilateral relations are not and this is uniqueness for us and means it's try or die. The tariffs Trump are not. The tariffs were not done on Mexico, and Trump has focused on migration and not on drugs. They've conceded the terminal drug cartels are increasing now due to digitalized markets which don't require intense regulation that ignites conflicts that undermine global trends, encouraging arms races, nuclear war. That's our habit evidence. They say They say our evidence from 2010. There's a new surge in the drug cartels, which means the risk is now the low impact of kleptocracy. And the no list economy's impact doesn't assume the specificity of South Asian economies, which the O crime can uniquely undermine. And they've dropped engineered pathogens, which spread quickly after combining with drug resistance, posing a unique threat. And they've dropped AMR once they're integrated into the microbiota. They collapse key earth cycles, killing ecosystems that sustain human life. Finished too. I'll do the turn at the bottom. The HHS layoffs is irrelevant because of A, fiat stalls, because we can give more of the resources to the FDA, but B, this is not our scenario. Our scenario is about the FTC creating a private cause of action to force companies to sue on the grounds of, they say, no disease. No, that's wrong. They cause extinction by collapse of society, ending of gene generic transfer, cognitive collapse of society, and infection of all humans. That's bomb. Prefer it. A, Thorstad does not assume knock-on effects, and B, has a PhD in philosophy and cannot talk about the effects of disease and epidemiology. They say that our cancer impact is hypothetical. That's wrong. It explains that it can be metastasized into humans. I'm also pretty sure they indicted the wrong part that we didn't read in the 1EC. Duchamp says that it evolves fast once it hits a metastatic cascade, eliminating humanity. The Ferker card is wrong. Treatment does not solve because once it starts going, then it keeps metastasizing, and there's no treatment now because otherwise we would have solved cancer. The FTCA to turn private enforcement is bad. One, no link in turn. The PTO adds private causes of action to statutes that are meant not to have them. They need that to win that private causes of action over the CSA or FDCA or in particular good. In those instances, it's good. In that case, it too treads enforcement and certainty of legal decision by court actively kills cooperation necessary for compliance. Bergman 13.
Judge General is lacking specialized training to deal with complex development for less informed than administrators. Private enforcement produces for implemented incoherent policies, resulting policy tend to be confused and contradictory. Judges only rule on issues prevented by credibility. Incidentally, therefore should not correspond with public interest. Peaceful, no policy without adequate consideration. We can be bureaucratic lawmaking diminishes the effectiveness of tracking and regulating on certain policy areas with wide opportunities for enforcement. The efficiency, safety value, subverts administrative ability, amount of campaigns to advance policy goals that are cooperating voluntary compliance, given the adversarial litigation, disrupt coordination, negotiate to further rules, just on voluntary compliance, voluntary will fail, Peter 18, got violence, regional suited terror, the natural selection, adverse against for devastation, violence, and contention of trade out, the rule testing one is act which killed on one, this is with a re-engineer, complex strategy, I don't think we are, in the face of the user public protectors to identify and prevent antibiotics to overcome ABR and develop vaccines and journals habits, and enable negativity inflate the odds, and their turn is written backwards. Their evidence about the private enforcement supplementing the FDA is talking about how the FDCA has built in private causes of action into it. The lawful use is not built into the FDCA because it's a rogue PTO interim, which means that it's not people in the FDA determining these private causes of action, nor is it judges determining these private causes of action. It's PTO examiners who are trademark experts, not experts in the FDCA, who are determining these, which means that this turn goes backwards because even if private causes of action may be good in the broad turn, it's not good in the context of trademarks because there's no expertise to determine these FDCA violations, which means they'll be decided incorrectly. And either way, we still have an internal link to our scenario because Big Pharma is using these. Kumar is not grossly miscut. It says that manufacturers like Big Pharma, like Eli Lilly, use trademark suits for their private causes of action to cycle out compounded drugs, which is our internal link, which means that even if they're right, we've written it backwards, we've still won that these private causes of action are being used to push out compound drugs, which means that compound drugs are key to solve for pandemics, which is their internal as well, which solves survive terror as well. See penalties. One, the version of the plan allows for the penalties. Two, plain text needs to back and three, strength protection means helping rights are penalty in case of disability, penalty, session, deterrent, penalty, robbery, insurance, penalty, whether the strength of the IP protection, strength, which is the first step, which is that for the rights, and just to make it easier, require appeal rights are part of the scope. IP protection makes it easier for strength of remedies for future. All strength protection for a particularly made out defenses for solutions. Core figures in the context of domestic projections be after other interest, no substantial changes in the scope, functional limits, reach, and captain, cloud, games, companies, all the restrict to a freight captain. One framework way the links to the plans field implications against a competitive alternative. Their expectation makes the opportunity defense and offense fairness the only impact. And inferior class makes critical research uses true words and signal right 20. Despite some competitive playing to from the law, equal the population, my middle, not run out, not having secondary capitals and different shortages, price spikes, and not getting features, most value use. We invest for more fun, more better use of the economy, gross survey, consumption is decreasing with running. More for land, 3, no link or evidence is generic. 4, private activity is running, which is possible for you to pretend everyone's a natural 5, prevailed. Either revolution abolishes capitalism, the cycle of everyone's late 60 all fails, 8, transition wars, domestic uprising, causes of perversion and conflict in the elects aggressive right-wing populists, both go nuclear phase. 1, permanent code, 2, permanent calc plan, 3, permanent plan, and any combo with the planks. 4, pursue any 4 can't solve grammar, 2 subpoints. 8, capitalized incorrectly gets misinterpreted and struck down by courts. B, verbiage not applied does not make sense because the PTO will circumvent it. That's Ramico's card. C, redundant parts as canvas are legal. The canvas is legal in the status quo, so the counterpoint gets struck down for redundancy. CSR. 1, no internal A is no spillover. Single instance of CSR doesn't institute a regime of governance. B, no A, B, non-unique. CSR is high in the status quo. C, no impact. Their evidence is a laundry list, intervening after strike. And they haven't explained their scenario for extinction, so you should error F. So it's 2, can't solve. The raw lights are key. Dickens 24. County should online for the American impossible for the consumers to avoid given lack of knowledge of equality, introducing certain levels of availability, no idea what's an unlawful institution coming to great use. Consumers decide which to avoid because of reliable, no rights. Mark Ed rights. PTO action is team goes to the teachers accordingly to pursue requirement. PTOs report the land rights. PTOs home and discuss tax. PTOs suggested court the Congress to refer to lawful use elsewhere. Issues Congress lacking text. PTO suggests lawful use stick by common law. PTO asserted never require rights to belong to acts. The agency has embraced 3 permanent votes solve the internal, 4 permanent plan and counterplan over other issues. Text are uncertain counterplans, which is textually and functionally permanent. That's key to background and objectivity. 6 permanent need to adopt the plan by the counterplans policy and formulation. Text uncertain 7 permanent plan and then 7 permanent counterplan. Then the app are interpreted that permanent specified sequence, but not time frame. Should refer to the future. Brown 8 should look to the future, but concern possible events. Text. 1, no original, A, no spillover. A single instance of taxing doesn't institute a broad regime of governance. B, non-unique taxes are high in the status quo. Cannabis and carbon taxes prove seek no impact on spillover. FC 24, overturning Chevron. Not administrative law creating regulatory capital limited policy making framework providing no guidance on leash uncertainty until the regulatory arena imposed and uncertainty experts will spillover and can by the other internal defense from the other counterplay. 2, can't solve circumventional lake. 21, something portion legally wealthy has the sure one interest in the billion direct creating a separate system for low-income American wealthy have our commercial take advantage of average adult. This circumventional required training. 3, for permanent go 7, which solves the internal 4 permanent plan of the counterplan over other issues. Russell said how the text counterplans must be textually and functionally competitive. Let's get after and obviously 5 permanent counterplan is the way the plan can be done. 6 permanent adopt the plan by the counterplan. Policy formulation 7 permanent counterplan. Then the app are interpreted as permanent so we can specify sequence but not time frame. Go back to the Legalization sets a precedent that undermines international law, destroying signal prevail. No for marijuana legalization, knowing violate, actually condos are voted on disposal souls. One, trade trans vaccines, enough passion, education. Two, fairness. Can't beat the best ideas ever imagined. You can strike off the card.
T, you said a sentence, the function of the plan allows for it. What's more?
Yeah. So as a result of the lawful use requirement, people will be able to enforce penalties on other trademark infringers.
Okay, I guess what part of that increases damages or injunctions?
I can't hear you. What did you say?
What part of that increases damages or injunctions?
Well, it would increase the damages that trademark owners would be able to receive.
Okay, so it's not a mandate of the plan, it's an effect of the plan.
I think that's a mandate.
The mandate of
The plan increases registration of trademarks, which increases the damages they can receive.
Yeah, that's an effect of the plan. The taxes counter plan, you said non-unique taxes are high in the status quo. What is an example of these majority taxes that exist in the US?
Well, not I think like cigarettes. Yeah, tons of cigarettes. I think there's like the Zin tax that's being proposed. There's like cannabis taxes all over the United States.
Do?
Huh?
What does the cannabis tax do?
Like in states, they have like cannabis taxes on firms that are developing marijuana. Oh, Rusty pulled up a list. They have carbon taxes, tobacco taxes, sugar taxes, and tons of other ones.
And those are in the United States.
Yeah.
Carbon tax is not the actually
That, I guess that makes sense. The
on the state level.
Chevron card, the no spillover card, can you explain?
Yeah, so your internal is about administrative law and the ability for the government to be an effective regulator through taxes. There's Etsy evidence that explains that Chevron created uncertainty into regulations and pretty much made it impossible for effective taxes to be enforced.
Okay, let's go on case. The first scenario about preventing radiation, how does the usage of weed prevent radiation? We said it's used in Chernobyl, but the card doesn't explain how.
I'm pretty sure it does. It explains that weed can suck up the radioactive effects from the nuclear fallout.
Yeah, but how? Is it like people have to smoke weed?
No, it's just the growing of such weed. And so the marijuana, when it's able to be grown, and when it's high quality marijuana, it sucks up the radioactivity from the ground. And it was actually used in Chernobyl.
So in the event of a nuclear war, our first priority is to grow weed everywhere.
That's a way. So once we have highly innovative and high quality marijuana, that would be able to be implemented where the nuclear fallout is to suck up the radiation.
Nuclear fallout,
so fallout
you read a
effects
card
don't
about
happen.
like nuclear winter. A nuclear winter would like destroy crop growth, would destroy soils. Like
Yeah, and so
how would
the
you
reason that it would destroy those soils and destroy crop growth is because there's radioactivity in the soil.
Yeah, but the
and
nuclear war
marijuana
happens
plants would be able to
first.
suck that up.
the nuclear war happens first.
Yeah, and obviously there would be some people living, so the radioactivity would be sucked up, and then humanity would be able to bounce
So
back.
there's enough weed planted right now that we could survive a nuclear war.
Not yet, because you need good seeds to grow good weed, which are harder look evidence explains.
Okay, sure. The O crime advantage. You read cards about like Southeast Asian conflict, and then how does that draw in the U.S.?
Yeah, our Luna card is, or our Saha or Luna, one of those cards is pretty good in explaining that Southeast Asian conflicts drawing here.
You scratched the last.
I didn't read the treaties.
Oh, you didn't read the treaties, though?
No.
You already need 10, right?
Sorry.
The
Yeah.
tournaments.
Yeah, tournaments. Yeah.
I'm gonna see when she gets back.
You're good.
Oh, that's CSR, taxes, advantage or advantage. Sorry, I'm gonna fill this up. So,
So bad. It sounds like coffee mug. Why would you say that, sir? Is that my shoes? Where'd you go? Shoes, did you?
I was two.
Okay, because I
I was
remember
two last
when
year.
I did it with
And I
you,
did
you would buy it.
And then he jumped to the
Sean, what do you think about this one?
That's cool. You just talk so much.
yeah, honestly,
Say
the
so
first
much.
year when I did it, every debater, like, oh, we have. So like,
Are you
so often,
Yeah,
so
but
it's
you're
like, we know,
you're
like,
you're never off. It's like mentally exhausting.
it was fun though. I really liked it.
I mean, I almost just half my junior year and for all my senior. Yeah. I think by the end of it, I was just like, it's like,
Oh yeah, he's asking.
like I don't have to always be on. You know what I mean?
No, it's definitely a lot, but I really liked it.
I
feel like
really miss
when
giving
you
the one
do
another.
That's true. I love doing that.
Right?
That's
The
like
13 minutes part was so nice.
Yeah. Have you liked the debates before stuff?
Yeah.
What's your favorite one so far?
Oh, it's gotta be last night.
No, definitely not.
What?
Last
You didn't think
night I
Lasso was
thought-
God?
No,
I already thought Lasso
Lasso
was
is
God.
not going to have a pretty specific theme,
So real third on our meeting of the month.
Yeah, that's big.
When we straight turned it, awesome.
That's huge. CSR taxes 1, 2. Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
Okay, y'all too. The company's also conditions to plan on corporate social responsibility. If a company meets CSR, they get IP protection aligned with the plan. That's all better and functionally similar to the plan relies on companies obliging to CSR air net. It's inevitable that a tsunami of blind spots exists. Not only the company optimizes to 25, like attention to societal impact well-being has been identified in literature. Blind spots rating explain why it's important, enables us to understand why CSR's positive impact. They've also dropped that negative externalities control the case. IP is arbitrary and enables strategic gaming. That's where let's go insert for reference. Use efficiency, deficiency, and impacts now. Yes, spillover. IP is a unique field with a clear deficiency for CSR. That's where let's go also inserted for reference. They have no evidence saying CSR is high, but if that's true, it proves spillover and no deficit because CSR is high. Just not applied to intellectual property. The impact outweighs. Do not check out on laundry list or courts that said the convergence of threats causes extinction. There's no word for why intermediate actors solve because all these impacts are short-term and committing to CSR would prevent environmental catastrophe, pandemics, tax shots, food shortages, inequality, supply chain disruption, inflation, collapse is inevitable absent the counter plan. So it's try or die. Certainty is offense. 1. The plan is worse. IP is complex and it involves conflicting obligations that demand ethical considerations. That's Orozco. Also insert for reference. 2nd, it's not unique. They said CSR is high. Companies already apply CSR, making every deficit inevitable. That's Orozco. Also inserted for reference. 3rd, the counter plan would swamp all deficits, only weaving them all together. Fortify stakeholder certainty. That's OC 220. No longer sufficient to narrow cartoon companies less than societal implications of IP. Corporate social responsibility and getting traction. Companies making decisions that respect human rights, respect and protect the environment. Fortify with the environmental social governance factors to give stakeholders measured, quantifiable criteria-led report. They've also dropped that the counter plan would fiat the plan if people meet CSR, which means that they have no deficit in the 2EC. It fiats both the IP protections and the PTO, which swamps all deficits. Now do both. Double line. Conditioning a plan on CSR means it's a wholly new responsibility. The plan mandates the same thing as policy, which is the basis of CSR-based compliance. It takes a narrow CSR approach that plays the counter plan with negative externalities. Article 24. Narrow CSR perpetuates such rules that lead to outcome that damage for executive externalities rise, internalize, and even greater expense zero cost of regulation. Companies play by current rules of the game without regard for true consequences, impose unnecessarily high costs on stakeholders and society. Doing both is an operational shortcut. Article 24 shortcut. Firms take its combined IP with the denominated legal process and negative consequences, societal responsibility, close related lines of law to achieve unethical outcomes and narrow models of CSR. Now, perm other issues. 1. It's answered by do both. We've read specific cards about CSR and IP. The one perm that they've read, and the perm sends a conflicting signal with traditional IP and CSR simultaneously, undermining CSR's positive effect. Any other permutation is not over IP, which means it does not solve the net benefit. 2nd, it's functional alone. 1 is ground, where hosts without process counter plans. There are 3 huge topic areas we don't need to find net ground. Asking upload the status code and remain topical and more germane evidence is a moving target that provides an impossible burden. 2nd is word game. Justifying gets out of net benefits with perms, co-ops, germane and non-germane net benefits, and deletes all counter plans. We do not learn anything when debate turns into a lecture. 3rd is logic. Textual competition distorts opportunity cost by ignoring meaning and rewarding plans off street independently that justifies functional damage, which makes the F a moving target. 4th is textual vagueness. There's no incentive to specify anything in the plan because it makes it easier to permute things. 5 is plan jamming and distorts opportunity cost with semantics and teaches logical decision making. Ban the plan would not compete as per because it includes every word in the plan text. 6 is arbitrary and textual competition imposes arbitrary ad hoc rules and is functionally the same as theory argument. No 1 year reclarification on what that means. Now, via the counter plan policies, also severance and links to stuff that I did about now. The delay permits intrinsic get out temporal separation between the counter plan and plan. Even if each can be delayed, that's new sequencing fiated by neither. Rejected intrinsicness destroys all ground. They can specify normal means to spike time-sensitive or agent-specific dissats and prevent education about real-world trade-offs. Independently, the 2EC did not include a formal text scratch. It's impossible to make severance arguments or read dissats since they're going to shift the perm in the 1 hour. We do not need to win this, but it summer should. That's immediate swear 17 and ordinary common meaning of should is expediency. Preferred delay justifies science fiction. Destroy timely education and spike ground. Worst case examples also don't apply. The delay counter plan can be excluded on theoretical grounds or being with the time-sensitive advantage. Now, permitting the counterplan and severance, voting issue for caution ground 1 is law. IPR is an exclusive legal right. Bottom 11. IPR, legal right to inventor, exclusive right. Resolve means by law. That's words in phrase 64. Resolve is an action will find to the establishment of laws used to law committee 17 years old. All black accusation non-binding laws for responsibilities not mandated. Now, protection must be permanent, guaranteed. Ross 19. Protection absolute legal orders precludes any possibility of discussion. Legal position preferred. Any other interpretation allows you have to be uncertain, not become a law, and allows to be rolled back by responsibility, directs ability. Also done about taxes counterplan. The counterplan stalls or replaces the affirmative IP protection with regulatory taxation affecting companies that violate anything that violates a federal statute that is equally effective. It's a massive disincentive because companies want to maximize profit. That's prudence. The result is a de facto obligation. Actually, I'm not going to read that. Okay. Airnex Omtis viewed relative to the status quo, not the plan, so nobody knows the difference. Now, yes, spillover, it's new and underdeveloped, lacking a clear role, independency, and complementary structures like command and control. Used in a bold new field like IP rights is an experiment that proves the concept and creates learning facts that chain together to tip the regulatory state in new directions. Once mainstream, it can be deployed broadly to cushion an array of societal responses as postures. It spills over. That's Auto 23 challenges to operating carrying capacity, call for transition, regulatory instruments, specific feature, establishing control, activities with social change and production, catalyzing policies and change system, directionality, net benefit outweighs magnitude. The counterplan alone, mainstream taxes as a vehicle to respond to societal crises are inevitable. From escalating pollution, species loss, air quality, political upheaval, and demographic shift, the current instability of the regulatory state to cushion and catalyze the global collapse that is existential. That's postures. Air it's an impact filter that turns for all of these scenarios. Permutation about the links to net benefit and penalty cannot solve the combination, creates confusion. That tickles to 11. It makes the tax obligation sense that confusion, single opportunities for double counting complex interdependence mix of policies result may be overlapping, conflicting with high overall coherence of policy mates may not easily become policy mass overlapping and will be and negative interactions will be blamed on taxes. Prevent mainstream is role 5. Interaction will lead to overall integrated policy based instruments resist replacement even with viable alternatives available. Legislative framework may be difficult. Policy interactions are neglected. By cost importance determining success of individual instruments. Independently erects cost basis compliance with the plan, the taxes regulatory targets which cannot be evaluated for future use. That's 19. Net presence and legal document tax objects necessary if the less stable legal object is absent. The tax basis quantitative characteristic when a dual tax policy allows a function to be realized. Main functions versus object quantitatively, i.e. measure leaving tax will be effective only when the base accurately changes the object. Due to counterplan severance, it's a voting issue for an end ground and clash. Tax law is housed in internal revenue code implemented by IRS, LAI 23, Internal Revenue Code, Domestic Portion, Statutory Tax Law, implementing AGs, RSS, IRC, Governing Law, Tax Administration, IPRs only patents, copyrights, and trademarks. That's new at Win 10. The IPR or cover patents for copyright, trademark patents, clause the Constitution, secure protection, patents dictated by federal patent statute, copyright, federal statute, pencil, author, commerce clause. Also passed the trademark statute, preferred non-IPR statute, expose the topic into any area of the law that also robs court, ground line, PTO, trade-off, clogs, regioners, and politics, air nag. All they need is IP key. A low burden for any two-way cross-play offense for delay perm, independently the functional perm stuff cross-play about it can solve the appeal of taxes cannot be proven in the abstract. Ruins case 13 to make sure appeal is quite obvious in contrast with theory. Details of actual enforcement are in the picture. Palms generality, deter law enterprise may be splintered. The reasons not happening is obvious. Certainly more specific precision. Higher appeal legislative judges are ensuring understand political design mode decision maker will be moved by comparing values. They see administrative costs. There's no impact. Companies are still afraid to violate the plan in case it gets taxed. They've also dropped that we fiat IRS enforcement, which is another unique discounter plan. They can also be easily calculated. One is methodology. The baseline is the same as the plan. IP agencies can determine what behavior is non-compliant using a variety of legal methods. If this is too complex, and the plan is also doomed, but it requires dense legal and economic knowledge. Second is defaults. Rates can shift from a flat percentage to a progressive structure based on a clear rule. Advantage 2. Concede no buyer turn, we're not going to go for the turn. I have no clue why they spent 5 minutes on case. It takes out genetic engineering scenario. On advantage 1, there's no disease. In fact, Dorset site studies way more qualified. The risk of virtually is low. There are islands and it won't spread. Even super diseases cannot cause extinction. Towards side 23, many sprinkle agents, virus unique to everyone. Interpreting the situation shift. Nuclear submarines, peppers, are not contracted astronauts. You need a virus that undetectable virus need to be transmitted. Every human on the planet. Avoid respirators and maintain transmission. Claim 99%. Also, no matter what they're going to make, you need to avoid distancing. How do you transmit virus to someone who does not leave their house? Animal studies cannot predict human behavior. That's molecular 12. The language included that relying on animal search human analysis flawed. Her own inventions of several published systemic review of reliability of animal models turn through the 50% animal studies predicted human outcomes sufficiently animal models can be useful, but it's frequently observed that effects in animal models cannot be translated to the plane. There's no cancer solved by treatment and DNA altering stuff. That's Frieger. Advantage 1, there's no case impact. Comb through every impact card for quality green sites at the Rooster magazine. Rostella is a reporter at ProPublica and Blake is a senior reporter. Even full ABR will not cause extinction. Mid-16, the worst case scenario would be 1940. Infection disease has been reduced by 90%, but there's no post-antibiotic error therapy will be effective and rapid myalgia all the time. Few bugs are resistant and untreatable. Even the worst bugs are always susceptible to at least one. This will not be an anti-useful of antibiotics. Now, it will be gentle. Actually, there's also no O-crime impact or other funding sources that make O-crime continuous regardless of the plan. Fishing vessels, espionage, cybercrime, etc. They've also dropped that Chinese O-crime has a limited impact broadly. All the groups are small, control is limited, and the quote level of violence is always low. There's no China war. Dali 22 multilateralism neither China nor U.S. standing for victory. Allies movement to both powers by the way modify strategies to deter Russian engagement, political war, and hostility.
CSR counterplan. So you said it's not fiat the plan. Do you fiat the PTO action?
Yep.
Okay. So who is it conditioned on? When This is just conditioned on the
It's
private
conditioned
sector.
on businesses.
On businesses?
Yeah.
So how does the
Any
PTO,
companies.
so how does the PTO determine whether those businesses are following corporate social?
Like this is the thing. So CSR is already like a legal concept, and they need to meet some social and environmental goals. If they meet those goals, then they get protections in the same way the plan does it.
Okay, so what would those goals look like? What would those be?
Like they need to, like for example, some of our cards say in the context of IPR, you can't do like things like bullying.
Bullying?
Yeah.
Okay, so if the PTO does not want to do the plan, then why will they set the goals like that?
Because it's a mandate of the counterplan.
Okay, so can you tell me every goal that's part of the mandate of the counterplan?
What do you mean?
So you just
Like
established
I don't know like every single like bullet point on what companies need to do in order to meet CSR. Like the point is, it's already a thing. Companies already need it for other things. Now the counterplan uses it for IP, and I think that's
so
necessary
you're
to
saying
spill over.
CSR is high. I'm going to your Rose Code 24 evidence, which is your 1C terminal. It just says that CSR is good. Why isn't that solved in the term?
What are you talking about? Because Orozco is about CSR and intellectual property.
Where do you think your 1C card ever makes the claim?
I'm pretty sure
that
the
CSR
title is
has-
about CSR and IP.
Yeah, then it just says companies should fulfill broader duties to stakeholders and
In
explains
the
why
context of
CSR.
IP, yeah, that solves the next risk.
Okay, and why would only doing it over a PTO interpretation that the PTO is going wrong on? It's not actually
Because it's not been applied to intellectual property yet. If there's a new rule that companies need to meet CSR in order to do the plan, then it would spill over to other areas of intellectual property.
Okay. Taxes counterplan. Does this fiat PTO action?
No.
No. How does the IRS compel the PTO to do the plan if they again don't want to do it?
Doesn't do that.
It does. So it does not do anything about what the PTO is doing.
No.
So the PTO keeps a lawful use doctrine.
PTO keeps lawful use.
So how does that solve?
Because
any
no one
advantage to
no one would infringe on those trademarks in the first place because they're being taxed at a high amount.
Okay, yeah, but how does it prevent the private causes of action that are resulted from the lawful use doctrine?
Explain.
Yeah, so advantage 2 is all about how it's a private cause of action and how it's not at all about infringement. How does it counterplan solve that?
Because it taxes everyone who's trying to infringe on those trademarks.
Okay, so the counterplan only solves for infringement, it doesn't solve for like other.
Yeah, but it means that they have no incentive to actually go for the lawful use stuff.
Well, can you explain that incentive? People circumvent tons of taxes, there's tax evasion in the status quo. Why is your counterplan key to
Because the
Preventing
tax is getting
big
set
marijuana
so
companies.
high that companies would not be willing to violate it.
like how high?
It's calculated by economists, like I don't know the exact number.
Okay, why would those economists be incentivized to set them
The
very
counterplan fiat stat to amount where it would generate non-compliance, which is part of the text.
Sorry. No, you're done.
Advantage 1, underscore,
Wait, can you repeat that?
yeah, advantage 1, the marijuana thing. Wherever you float condo, I'm gonna is where you see,
Okay, yeah.
and then,
Okay.
Sorry, there's like a really loud AC here, so this can get just silent.
Yeah, I got
want to be sure.
no escalation low 22 in the worst case window with the US accent on the hits. I see it unlikely to strike big enough to neutralize all Sunday EV for China launch. Their blame is one of the worst I've ever seen. There's not much better when you're all cutting weed propaganda. About IEA members saying that he would smuggle a nuke in weed. Right? Mexico about terrorists from entire ethos of massive crackdowns on the border make the relationship unrecoverable. Their evidence is from 2010 and massive chaos of the order in the last 15 years. Dude, forget the end condo. We get what we did. First is neck flags after all sectors of IP overturning tiny decisions and amendments. You this as if there's zero generic tried by multiple options. Just testimony see second arbitrariness. You have to always find a more marginally debatable interpretation, which leads negative every debate. Third innovation fallback tries the first two arguments to make research for it for processing, or once you force to see efficiency. If there's diminishing utility to adding more into enable key decides to be highlighted in more case. This goes bad, no definition for consensus. It can't solve which we see because it can't solve flex because we see dictates the blog's research and everyone just best argument in Congress first. Green Navy piece of engineer. Outcome was bad, multiple all for opposite makes it possible to give her any other argument than what 2 hours of modesty. Introducing advocacy. K. Cap causes extinction, planetary boundaries, market least locking unsustainable catastrophic collapse of biodiversity and global resource cycle. The second is pandemics, proper prioritization makes containment impossible, causing zoonotic emergence, increased existential antibiotic resistance. Third is war, Canadian military spending triggers nuclear, chemical, biological, and cyber war. That's durable. 2AC1 framework, evaluate competing and political imaginary net, hidden civil acts, consequences, and ideological underpinnings. First is resistance. Seemingly objective policy gases is constrained by market hegemony, centering discursive commitments, generates political mobilization, necessary to achieve sustainable social orders. Narrative 25, heating is entails making political determinants, universal constructing the objective, the rules of thinking constructed, discursive practice, stabilizing people's social objects, excellent alternative possibility, and there's going to be mobilized. Natural order can change capitalism to enter modern classic sound, right by universe, professionalized managerial, at least the language of capitalism, nothing actual contribution, economic seven, market relations, second is market logic. Lukemark 25, two to dominant, orthodox, alternative, heterodox, economic, external, market 50, not as use of coffee, unfelt, logical policy, economic space, going on the classical, orthodox, economic, right policy, the current price, expensive use of market, price, naturalization term, there's idea, everything reducible market, because of the simple discussion, a market question, and link term, clash, infinite, and caveats, the core and only functional limit on the topic with a non-unique disagraph. The topic was meant to be caveat versus IP last week in infinite private frame. The best advantage mitigates any regression. 2C4, epistemic, feeling, private actor, or wrong first extended is infinitely regressive and arbitrary. Economic planning is policy action, but the federal government making it test the basis of the 1C. The plan is equally epistemic and unlikely to be adopted. The difference is impacted by capitalist realism on framework. Second, it's good. Stop, Simon, and Smith 15. Utopia's method consider future studies, confident bodies of people accept living beyond present. Tools for future claims and alternative consider utopian thinking as engaging democrats to make human flourishing a method rather than go develop clear how society ever record equality change order. Study how the equality move beyond alternate future scenarios, especially about and overcome a mental institution. The economic plan is not unique. The only question is whether it will be democratic or oligarchical. The internet proves the link. 2C3, the link. Trademarks are an instrument of accumulation that's the driving force. And capitalism enables market forces to extract value from anything. It is an incursion on the commons. It also holds these entities to expand, grow, and maintain categories. The farmer should be in the public sector. Turns case reliance on trademarks because the K impacts, but also means that any innovation or competition that occurs under the affirmative has value that is artificially inflated or brand value rather than its actual usefulness. This all impacts after litigation between illicit and legitimate markets for weed is a link because it based off of the valorization of trademark and brands and devaluation of innovation that occurs outside of its frames turns a case because we will never solve for AMR or cancer. Turns advantage 1 and 2. 2AC2 is sustainability. It's sustainable. There's a finite. It's unsustainable. There's a finite number of materials that fall to sustain unlimited hunger, and the rebound effect means that demand only increases in the long term. More words. First is political Jameson. 4-3. Nail is definitely designed transponding of chamber of major community that the industry requires to be neoliberal period is audio example the producer of capitalist power and intersecting writers in the white tendency to what cultural social good activity must find process transition classes for nearly for a second is stagnation. Callous and all 25 high projects are showing stagnation of the ground due to rates of decreased evidence such as that increased innovation might be declined with evolution of recruits and factors development such as lower fertility rates or shifts of agriculture and water soda. There be beneficial factors because of risk. It's interesting that the third is resource limits. Callous on 25 membership can collapse as capital goods to shares of the legal resource on cultivation of these callous are really dependent on it. Prices coupled with stocks and power considers scarcity right limit for peace for agricultural pollution, economic sustainability, climate change. Pressure 66 of the planetary body is marked. The card of planetary boundaries now innovation. They say innovation. Commons develop. This in solve. Coverage and modern modern industrial culture place in European American field of ethics and commons place them often considered backwards. This is the gross character commons found no economic community focus on modern mass culture to really kind of communities developed through ideas commercially conventional business indigenous innovation. In countless of their suggestions that coverage and later social overview for free government and its commoners survive through renewal. Now the deterrence disease and causes pandemics foster I'm stating that card permutation mode that fails versus memory. Keys are not countless, they can't throw away. The link speaks the ultimate ideology of second surely everyone is just the alt. It's principally opposed to the alt plane. The water all one see evidence criticizes the idea of private property, which acts as a paywall that's working with third it links or distinct. Alberts in 24 social litigation, alternate counsel, different perspective, organizing kind of market, learning, invisible hand, clear contrast with common ownership, production under social democratic law, single margin, with private ownership alongside the alternative solved. It's a two-pronged approach that employs screening and scaling technologies and accelerates democratic mission that illicitly democratically formulated demands for new technologies, selects promising early-stage technologies, develops towards final product. The alt facilitate efficient planning and self-keys. The to enable plan their economy of two conditions, technological affiliate, allow research information after the market process, market the card, and they see transition wars, invert your standards for transition wars, they need to win. Their private capital can overcome the military, not that the military suppresses the alternative. It's not a domestic uprising. It's a planned economy. It's public funding. That's your only word that was above a public economy would be steady. Lane 23 is state-led. Public ownership that also needs to well-being through full employment, entrepreneur revolution, religious, civil, or ideal growth policies, and transitional periods, federal revolution, conventional system would not be dismissed as the remain pluralistic towards economic, political stability.
capitalism decay, CSR counterclaim, tax counterclaim. Disease outweighs strong knock-on effects, human to the stratosphere, and cognitive cause causes extinction independent of infection, but infection also kills everyone. Thorstad, a philosophy professor world-reading scientist, independently, its empirical self disproven because it increases globalization, and mutation overcomes the burnout effect. Now, the go to advantage one, crime goes nuclear, it causes Chinese instability, which another causes assume other sources do not solve. Chinese crime is the largest industry and causes billions of dollars. There are evidence about petty theft, not Chinese crime, yet no China war is not specific to instability. It's not true. Crime is the key internally. The weed, also U.S. violent and Mexico bilateral relations solve existential arms racing. It's tried the only serious policy defense. Our evidence might be slightly old, but our evidence is certainly true about U.S.-Mexico relations. It's descriptive of how to operate into future opposite enforcement. Framework where the plan and the permit gets competitive and fiat a legitimate alternative there in terms of unfair and civic ties will let us fiat as many private actors as we want and delete your ability to review any critique. No one can meet the fiat world peace counterplan, no perms. And then what is he discuss world one sleek under your interpretation, two internalize, one half ground. You can't objectively determine if the all differs philosophically causes race at the bottom things. Like process counterplans beat up value statements, two private actor fiat deficits are impossible. Private actors become angels that kills fairness, which outweighs its extrinsic good. That both sides rely on insurance education because no incentive to learn. No unfair game and there's no subjectivity to sides. And again, arguments have already read that and they say resistance one turn they fiat. Everyone becomes anti-capitalist. They haven't done any planning at all. 2 material. It challenges us with links to the plan. 3 subjectivity school. Friends and other things affect our subjectivity more plus communist forms. That's all. They say market logic. So is solvency and everything else in this debate crossplay. Fairness turns education. They say they straight turn fairness and education wrong. The one cap is not predictable. Cap good bad is not the resolution. It should not be the starting point for a prep. 2 cannot universalize it. Every author has a different idea of what capitalism is. Plus the cap might be somewhat predictable, but world peace is not. Now they the link turns gets the perm first. They perm solves the case. It all overwhelms the links or can't solve because the all fiats basically fiats in a communist or new communist government. The case link turns case is wrong. It's the case turns the case friends. The black market which friends bad unadulterated wheat from being produced. Also friends big pharma from capitalizing on private costs of action. No legitimization or competition links. Those don't assume the specific mechanism do. Both answers don't apply for representation about materiality. The answer the links and the different philosophically different distinct philosophies as answered on framework because they're so combinable materially all it fails even if it's an economic shift. They conceded that it's either that election campaign fails it's proved that in military blocks the coup of Wall Street forms a counter-revolution that continues capitalism even if it's fiat the government will change. No way that the York can abolish capitalism and act socialism to solve climate change theory. Sure, they see utopianism good. That's wrong. It's not arbitrary because the Brett says USMG show which runs to that actor. So the plan isn't linked to because the plan says is only the USMG utopianism. It's not good because fairness turns education and fiat's world peace, which is that. CSR. No Jones case, CSR is not key to IP and the status quo solves its existence now and their net benefit. Does not say IP is key, but solves the net benefit. Do both also solves it establishes volunteer requirements for corporations and abolishes self-use. Otherwise, the counterplan is illegal because they cannot have trademarks over marijuana if they violate federal statute. The voluntary CSR cannot solve the case, so that zeros their deficits. Now, the plan of the counterplan over trademarks. That solves counterplan solves based on the process of the plan. IP is not key. Their impact evidence is about CSR broadly, so the perm equally spills over. Plus, it's about IP that was done above. Now, textual counterplan supposed to be the text and function. The perm that doesn't, so it's legit. Prefer one objectivity functions are murky, arbitrary, and ad hoc. Only textualize on an unchanging basis. Truth says counterplan legitimacy. 2 Afghan function alone leaves out a sitting duct to smooth cheating process. Counterplans threaten signing statements, reverse guidance, and all executive actions. Root functions of the plan. Theory does not check. And they said it's arbitrary. They say net ground are to resolve speech errors, spill for politics score, and IP out with the ball as they conceded from topicality. They say perm giving right about text. The counterplan could compete, but it doesn't based on their text. Proved by perm on the counterplan. Their error the negative the block and justice overcorrect on this topic because If they think it's out by itself, logic is they're wrong. Ban the plan is not. Ban the plan does compete if they have improved an opportunity cost of the plan. There's no impact of our model is good. It's logical fairness. So ways that was done above. No vagueness is wrong. Compliance leads to presumption or punished by teams. Interpreting normal means functional terms. Checks and function checks. Picks. They say plan jumping. Picks solve. Humans can write about checks. Non-risk theory. Arbitrary. This is not starter sexual competition. Is a method to read the resolution. So it's not arbitrary. Non-risk theory is good. Check fiat and object fiat. The taxes counterblend do both the currency's predicate of taxation. Fiat solves the rest of the deficits. Burn to the counterblend. This is normal means competition. The basis of law is still IP. The counterblend specifies more, i.e., the specific enforcement mechanism of normal means competition. Is bad managed for the most objective inference. A smooth cheating pick can see their card. That IP. That the counterblend does IP because it does trademarks. The PTO says no to the counterblend. They'll ignore without sexual support. That's because taxing infringement does not solve private action because it's about PTO misinterpretation. The PTO will not make a trademark so it doesn't fiat them. So the counterblend's legal no insurance case. On the deficit and the permanent both solves this. Permanent the app and the counterblend over the other issues like extended competition above the vagueness on depth does not apply. The word text might be slightly not specific, but the function how it's enacted is still specific. The inevitable presumption argument on CSR was answered by insurance case above.
We have 4 pages.
It's just CSR.
Just what?
Just the CSR. Are you? Okay. The company's solicitation conditions of plan protection is stopping violations of federal statutes and companies meeting CSR. This is also immensely better than the plan of 1 year sporting data here because they dropped every single word. One is impact drop. That means it's textbook try or die. Committing to CSR prevents environmental catastrophe, pandemic, sex shocks, food shortages, inequality, supply chain disruption, and inflation. Second, they dropped negative externalities. Two, the case is explicit in the 1C tag 1 in our overview, which means that you should vote neg on presumption. They conceded that IP is arbitrary, ambiguous, and enables strategic gaming. The only 1 error answer at the top was that CSR is not key to IP, which is not an answer to this argument on presumption. Third, we conceded that certainty is key to the plan, and then read a certainty disset to the plan, which is 1 error drops. IP is complex, played with conflicting resources, and it requires ethical considerations, which only the counterplan solves, which is again another neg value. 1 error 1, CSR is key to IP. They dropped that blind spots exist, it's inevitable, and the counterplan optimizes it in a bold new field that does not exist right now. Our article says it's about the use in IP. They have no articles about CSR, and they dropped the downward thing about accentual rates, which is not above. Either way, it's try it out. They dropped the impact, so do not check out on this deficit. 1 error 2, do both cannot solve. Do not interpret this as voluntary requirements and abolish lawful use, because that was not in the 2EC, and that is not the plan text. The perm also does the plan, and also conditions the plan on CSR, which undermines CSR positive effect. There is no possible winning 2ER. They dropped the counterplan solves the case and the net benefit, which means that offense, defense flips neg. They do not understand this. Any risk of deficit to the perm, even if it's at 1%, is the reason why you have to avoid that opportunity cost, whether it's perm other issues, whether it's perm do both, because they've dropped that it is try or die, and they have no solvency deficit. Narrow CSR is the perm because it does the plan without CSR-based principles. They've dropped that means that the perm would still, quote, perpetuate social ills and negative externalities with high costs in society. They've also dropped operational shortcuts. Do not check out, we did not explain it in the context of the plan, because every card says that simultaneous reliance on the law destroys the positive effect of CSR. Now, perm other issues. I'm going to start with the competition debate. Consequence must only compete off function. The perm violation does a counterplan over another issue, which is functionally intrinsic. Either way, you do not have to evaluate this competition debate, because I know you probably don't want to judge all of this minutia, but because they've dropped the deficit and it's try or die. One is ground. Process the key backs off against F's on this topic, given outside bias that frames how you value competition, because topic bias makes it try or die for next survival, which raises the threshold to vote off on competition. First is structurally, they get infinite proud topic choice, and last speech, which was conceded off of the cap case. Second is literature. Clog is the next go-to argument, and that would be the worst decided on any other topic because it's totally Frankenstein and lacks uniqueness. Every subset is massive, infinite, and least in neck to be sitting ducks. They can make by new granular tweaks because there's a million articles that advocate for resolution. The only topicality argument allows us to uphold the status quo. Their words are all wrong. The entire point of our competition offense is that germane net benefits cannot solve. Flex is not massive on this topic. Do not check out on 2ER gaslighting. The 1ER does not list a single example, but everything about the literature base should frame how we value competition. We've been consistent about our example throughout the debate. They've also dropped that shoot is not immediate off of perm to the counterplan, which deletes counterplan competition for their model and means that cheating counterplays do not compete. They also did not list any functional limits. Again, no 2ER gaslighting. You cannot just say it and then check out on it, which means that you should not check out on that either. We said the cap K is the only functional limit from the cap K, and they dropped that from the 1NR. The block is wrong. After stop on the 1C and the 2C to be vague with no net recourse other than process counterplan. Second is textual competition is bad. This is both offense and internal link turns all of their warrants to justify logical word games that distort how we understand actual real world policy. They can create add-ons to perms by shifting the words into the counterplan to create an entirely new net benefit. A counterplan that says to protect IP through space assets could be permitted to protect space assets with a net benefit in space called good that ensures the net always loses to scramble. You can also jam the plan with relevant words like fun, not, or only to create better unpredictable permutations because textual competition encourages plan sophistry. In addition to plan jamming, you can be vaguer because there's no incentive to give disenegg more ground. In a world of textual competition, why would you specify anything? Adding words only disenegg more opportunity to pick out of those same words as well. They say no res basis. There are incentives to specify. If you do not, then the normal means implementation of the plan could be more undesirable. They say pig solve. It's also unpredictable. You can add random connectors like and or nor that are not meaningful enough. There's no internal links that are based on that words. It's also preempted by infinite app prep because they can choose words that they want to defend. They've also dropped that there's no definition of what textual competition means and did not attempt to redefine it in the 1 AR, which means that alone short circuits all their offense. Now, they have no offense. One is no after-round laws. Topic subsets are infinite. The scope of industry and IP subsets means that some after B generics will still exist. They have to have the burden of finding quality deficits, given the ball is in their court. Air next, smaller topics are better. Maximizing depth. They're warned about slight tweaks and mechanisms, has no examples. We provided examples, if and only if. They solved by textual intrinsic perm. By adding the word not and equities is not abusive because it's topic specific, as is CSR. Side bias is impact calculus. Those done above, which is an impact turns all their offense. Second is theory check. Judges adapt since your teams off to be F2. There's also deficits like modeling, certainty, rollback, etc. Now, objectivity is wrong. One, they link as well. Their model of debate is textual and functional competition. That means that just that's functional competition is incoherent because that's a burden that they place. Second, we only defend functional competition of the plan. That's why we read definitions of words in the plan and do not rely on positional competition. Functional is backed by evidence, which is easy. Third, there is no terminal zero reason why objectivity is good or outweighs fairness. Either way, they've also dropped our reasonability cross-application. We clearly said that if theory debates are undesirable, so if our model is sufficiently desirable, then you should win to disincentivize app from debating competition instead of substance. They've also dropped that even if you somehow think they've won competition, the deficit is simple to check out on. I do not understand what the 1 AR is saying here. We've read specific cards about CSR and IP, and the perm would send a conflicting signal with traditional IP and CSR IP simultaneously because CSR has not been applied to IP, which undermines CSR positive effect. Either way, it is offense, defense. MBA does not understand that, and they're going to drop everything on competition into 2 AR.
Advantage 2.
You're voting out for this debate because Tatum has to stop going for softs. Disease outweighs knock-on effects, ensuring extinction via geoengineering, cardiac collapse, and civilizational collapse, all of which cause extinction, which is illustrated by our bomb evidence. The problem with the 2 AR is that Gautam goes for a deficit and then to link turn to advantage 1, but not advantage 2. He misses the internal link on advantage 2, which is specifically about companies and big pharma suing on the grounds of the lawful use doctrine, which means that even if Gautam is right, that trademark law is ineffective. That's irrelevant because the lawful use doctrine still exists on the books, which creates a private cause of action for private companies, which means that they still can sue. It doesn't matter if trademarks are inefficient or that parent case is only over infringement like 2C Crossing says, because that's not our internal link to advantage 2, which means that all of the solvency arguments that Gautam goes for in the 2 and R are irrelevant because that's not because are irrelevant because those don't apply to our second advantage, and it doesn't apply to advantage 1 because you know that there's still significant uncertainty in the status quo for the federal trademarks on marijuana, which means that the app still bolsters some certainty, which means that we still can solve for that, which means that the counterplay does not solve for advantage 2, which means that it's try or die, and the flips affirmative. Go to the counterplay.
permutation to the F and do CSR over the entire field of trademarks is the first perm in the TOC TOC. That solves best. Russell explicitly says in the 1AR that, quote, it applies to counter the counterplan more broadly, which means that CSR spills over to the entire field of trademark law, which means that we solve the internal net benefit better because it spills over to all trademarks, not just one case, which means that the signal is perceived more broadly and better. The 2NR deficit push is a not makes sense because Russell clearly did extend a deficit to the net benefit, which answers the offense-defense framing. The counterplan is illegal. It doesn't mandate the lawful use requirement gets changed, which causes PTO misinterpretation and circumvention. Read their text, apply CSR to create, quote, voluntary requirements for corporations. Their whole competition argument is about the lawful use requirement being mandated is key. The 1AR said that zeros their deficits to the perm because absent fiat and lawful use, application of CSR does not spill over. It's not trying to drop CSR exists now and applying it to intellectual property isn't key. Their impact card is a bunch of gobbledygook highlighted like a Christmas tree that just lists random impacts about CSR and not IP. The use the permutation is legitimate. Use functional and textual competition. The counterplan is the permutation is functionally intrinsic, but textually is legitimate. That's best for Africa. Their interpretation greenlights a slew of cheating, unnecessary counterplans that don't actually prove the germane opportunity cost to the plan. Their interpretation justifies the worst of the worst counterplans that don't have anything to do with IP. I go back up a little bit. The certainty DA was answered by on case, and it's also external to now our second advantage to the legitimacy. The signing statements, their interpretation justifies signing statements, reverse guidance, and executive actions, which all lack the force of law, like this counterplan, which makes the app sending back to the worst of the worst counterplans because there's no deficit, because they all result in the implementation of the plan. The counterplans like these that compete off the force of law, like signing statements or uncooperative federalism, don't fiat the plan and compete off that, but they result in its implementation, which means that 2NR's push on modeling or certainty or things like that are wrong because you cannot get deficits when the counterplans lead to the implementation of the plan. Sure, you might be able to get a fiat keyboard, but that skews the debate towards the negative because they have infinite prep to prove why some process of creating and implementing a policy is good. Their interpretation also justifies even worse counterplans. Delay, consult, cheat, and sunsets all compete under their interpretation because Gautam has said that should is not immediate, which means that those counterplans are justified under their interpretation, which means it's even worse for AFGround. And theory does not check. That's a moral hazard because judges will believe that because you can't just check out on theory checks when their model justifies that competition determines legitimacy. And if those counterplans are beaten on permanent counterplan and on perm other issues, judges will be resistant to voting on theory because they will believe that those are germane opportunities cost to the counterplan. Draw the line in the stand for net ground. Greenhill has had this app since Emory and has admittedly had a good case study of the 1C, but they chose to extend two process counterplans instead. Net ground is wrong. Under their interpret the AFIS codes and the net gets to do whatever they want to do. They concede functional limits in the block. There's tons of options for the neg. I don't know if Gautam was flowing, but the 1AR has definitely listed a bunch of different functional limits which they conceded. Sui generis, which literally gives the equivalent of protections of every plan copy-pasted in the system under a different moniker. Abolish IP, even if these apps can uphold disclose, they uphold predictable errors of IP. The neg can say are bad. The cap the 2NR agrees the functional limit. We only disagree that it's only functional limit with the permutation. The red says property, which allows the easiest link in history. They say that the literature and apps that topic bias was answered above, and the side and the structural constraints are answered by the block. They say our interpretation allows for word games. That's wrong because word games are not a justified interpretation because you just have to write a better text. Plan jamming is solved because 2Ns can read picks and 2Ns can garner ground off of textual vagueness. There's no office. If they dropped fairness outweighs logic means there's no impact to this. They say there's no impact to objectivity. We went for out.
I'm going to send it.
Yeah, go back to it.
to intimidate you. Yeah. And for no team in particular.
Me, really, no team in particular.
Hey, me neither. Exactly. Yeah.
That was a joke. Like, we all work in the same school. We grew up in the same school. This is all my work again so far?
Yeah, so you had the doc open, you were like, don't look at that. I was like, okay, what?
Showstopper. Oh, we might even crack. This is what I have.
There's cracks somewhere out there, right? It's only sandy from scratch.
I just want to.
Okay, you're crazy.
What are we going to do next? Oh, this is me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're good.
I was confused.
No, yeah. It's okay. That's not bad.
What month is levels do? Okay.
I think I could be surprised if we started this season,
Oh.
but I don't care.
What do you call it?
Maybe with her IPK.
Yep. Oh, it's 18 though.
Oh.
These cards are, you got so many cards.
Yeah, I don't really work with her. I don't even think I sent any of those to them though. Or maybe I did, they just sent me them. Why did I highlight these in green? It's disgusting. The tags are really long because I just wrote whatever.
Or does it also fit like all three?
Okay, I think it's probably better.
It's just easy both of those.
Yeah. I think it's better to just go. Then I want to copy if like they both. You know what I'm saying?
It could be
Yeah,
different.
yeah, yeah.
Like no matter.
I sent them.
And then it's the different thing. It's just like
Taking like stuff that
that's the because we have it for next week's missing that part, which
Yeah.
ironically is literally the entire idea. But
I have it somewhere.
thank you.
TOC channel. It's like, oh, it's not.
Do you drink anymore?
Huh?
I drank mine like in the first like 3 minutes of sleeping. That's
Like,
Self-reported.
caffeine. It's just like fuck it, but whatever.
Hey, you know what? It's okay.
Okay.
I think the second part. Well, the tag is the longest, so I'm assuming it's the best.
I need to go ask him.
Oh, is it?
Well, the second one's long. My favorite last one really short. Not really short.
Yeah, it seems like the most legit thing.
This one's like funny this year.
Wait, there's one?
Yeah, the second part came out in 2003.
I saw that. That was exciting.
It's okay, we don't need new cards.
I had good digital cards today.
Like one good one would be nice. The rest
Wait,
can be ass.
this is because this is in the last one. Like,
We have one already.
yeah.
Cool.
Wait, what
Okay,
is?
here's what I think we should do. Is,
Wait, like,
can I? This one,
like the insurance.
really?
No, horrible.
I feel like you're asking how good this card needs to be because it's
I sure was. So there's this one too from the last year. It's just like we do a suspended review of literally every study field with an HM we can do that comes along for it. Like all we need is that one card.
Oh.
well, yes.
Wait, is the camera still on camera?
So the live stream. They can hear you. Mahasha, everyone. Oh, we can start with like
This is awesome. I don't know his face. The world. It's not
the way you can just go outside.
No. Well, we're doing it for a lot.
Oh, wait, I got this card. it's the Jack of the War.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that? Jacobin?
I thought it was
Jacobin,
Jacobin.
you know what it is?
I don't know.
Jacobin.
I want to say Jacobin, man.
I say Jacobin.
Who asked?
Your mom.
Yeah.
Dude, I took like 30 minutes to decide.
What did you do yesterday? I just told you.
I took a really long period
This is
to.
like
Oh, yeah.
for everything.
No, for your debate. Oh, yeah.
Did it? Oh, sure. Mm.
Did you mention the moves into not like for me?
What?
You're not saying what you're saying.
Can we play telephone?
You're unreal.
And Sam, you have to say it out loud.
No, they're just liars.
That's just the joke.
You're not funny.
I was drawing deal with it.
Oh wait, yeah.
They totally did. I was like, he's good. He's really good. We just did housing pitch and going on the desert.
Yeah, the bowl.
Yeah, and he's the one who we were like, yes.
You got two? Oh, he's one of them.
Oh yeah, but he was full alphas.
Oh,
King.
wait, what is he?
Sorry.
What is he studying?
He's doing just fine. He's the son of from KBC at a startup. Or like an AI. I honestly, I wouldn't call it a startup. I actually don't know if it is. Like AI company.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It seems really, really cool.
And you're in Gipcon.
Like,
Okay. Can I come visit?
of course. Yeah, it's like ASU in America. Everyone's welcome.
Okay. I just want to come for the beach. Wait, your club's so fun. Which
We're
one?
going runs. We're starting to go on runs now, so we can be skinny and hot and go on runs there too.
Okay.
It's cute, it's cute.
That's cute. Wait, can I actually come?
I'm so serious. Welcome back. We'll all have our house this week.
Are you gonna, when are you going, June?
June 7th through August 20th.
We're not coming in June.
We'll never stop out.
Yeah. Are you living with other people or is it just?
So, people there, it's weird housing. People there, it's usually it's not vacation. So my understanding is people that like don't live their houses. So I'm doing for nonprofit. So apparently like either they like have children in their kitchen with them, or they'll like leave kids live there.
Oh.
So I don't really know who they are. But it'll be fun to write this. Where do you do this thing?
I am going back to Chicago for June, and then I'm going to hopefully do research at like med school.
Well, I can't hear it.
Huh?
I can't hear it.
Oh, I use Chicago.
Oh, okay.
And then,
Oh, yeah.
And then, but July and August, I'm going interning for a U.S. district judge in Florida.
Wait, that's sick.
So hopefully it should be good. But we'll see.
Wait, that's so fun. What do you interns with that is?
Well, she had a bunch of trials this summer. So yeah, so we'll be writing orders and like briefs from her like law clerks too. So yeah, that'll be exciting.
Yeah,
But
that's
then also it's like she has a bunch of law clerk people who've gone to law school, so I feel like I won't know what I'm doing.
you'll learn a lot. That's what
Yeah.
it is.
I think I always feel like, oh, I have to be the one who's like doing a lot, but sometimes you learn by like just like looking at other people.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my god.
here, so this is mine.
Is everyone good? Okay, this is a wonderful debate. Thank you all for letting me judge. I ended up voting affirmative for okay, so the place I started was by asking if the counterplan solved the case, and I think the big issue in this debate for you all, Greenhill, I think is just sort of mishandling this second advantage. I think that, like, from pretty early on, the internal link is very distinct from advantage one, and a lot of your like solvency arguments that are embedded on the counterplan, as well as your explanation for why the counterplan would solve the app, assumes like the story of the first advantage, but does not really grapple with their argument about lawful use and like the need to change the way that the PTO is making those decisions now. So the chair, goes for advantage two and says the counterplan doesn't solve private cause of action, which means that because lawful use exists, people will still sue. That seems to their case in fact. I end up concluding that that's true and like don't really understand based on TUNAR explanation why it's the case that the counterplan would resolve this. So as I understand the counterplan and as explained by the TUNAR, the end point of protection is given on the condition that CSR is met, but that doesn't speak to the question of the fact that the PTO is deciding that like certain statutes render that protection illegal. So the 1AR like makes this argument, the 2AR further then explains it as counterplan happens, like the PTO is still going to say those protections are illegal because unlike the plan, which like changes the way that they decide those legality instances, the counterplan doesn't do that, it just conditions corporate behavior. So I, at this point, decide the counterplan does not solve the app. Then I have to ask, like, does the case outweigh the net benefit? Because it's true, like, initially I'm like, well, the net benefit seems pretty large, so like maybe there's just some like fee out of the NDA here. Few problems for that. The real thing is like the 2AR, and I think that the 1AR has enough of this, says like winning the counterplan would be illegal or like those protections would be found to be illegal means that there's not enough spillover. So 2AR is like if the counterplan's protections are provided on the condition of CSR being met, but then the PTO is like these like protections violate certain statutes that would interfere with the ability for the counterplan to like be modeled or spill up. And I don't have like anything in the TUNAR that grapples with this. Like I went through my flow a couple of times to like see if there was any explanation that I felt like implicitly answered this argument, and I concluded there wasn't. And so the net benefit I think is quite large, but because I am unsure if spill up or like spillover would occur, I think that like 100% of the app outweighs. A couple other things, like that's the crux of my decision. A couple other things I'll note. I do agree with the TUNAR that a couple of these solvency like tricks embedded on the counterplan are dropped. The problem is that I then agree with TUNAR that they only are about advantage one, and I don't have any application in the TUNAR to advantage two. So like I thought about trying to apply it for you, and I just decided that would be like it would require too much intervention on my part. Like the only thing I have the TUNAR really saying is like the 2AC said certainty is key. Like we considered that and said there were some certainty. The 2AC certainty argument was only about advantage one. And then this like IP is arbitrary / causes strategic gaming. That's like the extent of the TUNAR explanation. I don't really know what that means, and so I'm just like not willing to go there. I evaluated competition, just like for fun, I suppose. I ended up barely concluding affirmative there as well. My reason for that is like I think that the app does have some like functional limits in the 1AR that TUNAR just asserts like the 1AR didn't list functional limits, but I think that like sort of hurts some of your main offense about why you wouldn't necessarily need this to be neg, and so I ended up concluding that like the risk that your model of competition makes it impossible to beat app outweighs the risk that it's hard to be neg, given they have some functional limits that you conceded, including with the packaging. Yeah. Different questions.
So my main question, it's not about competition, but about the deficit. So
Yeah.
I'm confused by the counterpoint can't be PTO.
So I don't understand it being explained that way at all. So hashed out in CX, I believe. Like the AF's argument is if currently these statutes are being like said to prohibit certain types of IPR protections, the counterplan doesn't do anything to change that, is my understanding. Slash like the 2NR certainly doesn't explain why it would change that, and so like I'm with you that in theory this counterplan might solve it. I have the 1AR being like the counterplan would be found to be illegal, slash like the PTO would still decide that this stuff is unlawful. I have no 2NR words about this other than like the counterplan just conditions the plan so it solves, but that doesn't really assume the like AF's argument.
Wait, but if it's a conditions counterplan, why would it be illegal? Like it literally does the plan.
Well, but it also it doesn't though. Like I looked at the text is just like provide protections on the basis that CSR is met.
Yeah.
But it removes, my understanding, it removes the part of the plan that like, I forgot what the word is.
The registration process?
Yeah.
Okay, so if the tuner said like normal means of those implementation, of that implementation could be eliminating the registration process.
I think you're in a much better spot. Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm with you that in theory I think the counterplan could do that. I just like, I don't have anything that you know that like it's that threshold, and I do have the 1AR explicitly being like counterplan would be illegal for this reason. And so I just like I don't feel like I have enough to make that jump for you.
And you were nagged on, I mean you were after the foundation. So you were after on the ground, you weren't, what about like the textual foundation pass though?
Okay, that's so I thought it was briefly because I was like I don't actually know this, but
Yeah.
I think it would have been apt. The textual competition bad stuff. I think you're winning that it distorts policy, but I don't have an impact to that, so I don't really know why that like matters for Albany's fairness. I think they're winning that like good counterplan text writing means that the app can't get away with like the worst versions of these terms and picks solve like jamming the plan with stuff. I think like maybe I could have been better on this like you get to make add-ons with terms.
Oh,
Like you all are like smart counterplan writing solves. I don't really know if that's true because if you can scramble the words any way you want, it seems tough. So like if substance were negative, it would have proved that there's a lot more. So yeah, I guess also I think I really got my knowledge.
okay.
But like maybe
Were you nagged on deficit at the time?
on deficit to firm, I don't think so. I don't feel like I understood the deficit to the firm as was a
Do you think there was a 2AR answer to the deficit?
I mean the top issue is like the implementation would do the app and do CSR over all of trademarks, which like would solve because if you're right that doing it in the field IP is like the implementation is a bigger internal step. It's not just one instance of trademark, it's all of trademarks. Like that seems intuitive.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. I wanted to know should have
How can you cover the cap better than better tool?
I think mostly like I obviously didn't end up resolving this debate. I am not great for just like framework if they don't get the cap key on the IP topic. I don't it's like that's the if there's any neg argument it has to be that one. And so I also was like a little bit confused about all of this like private actor / utility and fiat stuff, and like it would need to be resolved more. But I it's like on face to me, I don't think this all is necessarily private actor fiat. Like I don't really think we all fiat on movement, and also if they win framework, then it's like we all on a counterplan, so they're not fiating anything. So I don't know. I think for me, like the better strategy would just be like impact. IP is good, and everything being a public good is bad. We presumably have a